The lock on the door was rusted through, and when Marcus Ironwood pushed against the weathered oak, it gave way with a groan that sounded almost accusatory. 5 years of war had aged him in ways the mirror would confirm later, but standing in the doorway of what had once been his modest cottage, he felt the full weight of every battle, every mile marched, every night spent wondering if he would ever see home again. What greeted him was not the dusty abandonment he had expected, but something far more bewildering. His entire front room had been transformed into a verdant jungle of flowering vines, herbs suspended from the rafters in neat bundles, and clay pots of every conceivable size lining surfaces he barely recognized as his own furniture. The scent hit him next: rosemary, lavender, something earthy and medicinal he could not quite name. Sunlight streamed through windows he remembered as grimy, now spotlessly clean and framing the chaotic beauty of the garden within. His boots, still caked with the mud of 3 kingdoms, tracked dirt across floorboards that gleamed with recent care. For a moment, Marcus simply stood there, his travel pack sliding from his shoulder to land with a heavy thump, wondering if exhaustion had finally driven him to hallucination. Then he heard humming. It came from what had been his small kitchen, a low, rhythmic sound that held more melody than any orc voice was supposed to contain according to the stories soldiers told. Marcus's hand went instinctively to where his sword would have hung, but he had surrendered his weapon at the garrison 2 days prior, keeping only a belt knife that would do little good against an intruder. Still, 5 years of survival instinct could not be dismissed so easily. He moved quietly, sidestepping a particularly aggressive-looking fern that had colonized the space beside his hearth. The kitchen doorway revealed her, an orc woman, easily as tall as he was, with skin the deep green of summer leaves and black hair bound back in a thick braid that fell past her shoulder blades. She stood at his table. Though it now bore scratches and stains, he did not remember grinding something in a stone mortar with practiced efficiency. She wore practical clothing, a tunic and trousers that had seen hard use but were meticulously clean, and her tusks, small and curved, were just visible past her lower lip as she concentrated on her work. Marcus cleared his throat. The orc woman spun with a speed that spoke of her own hard-won reflexes, the pestle raised like a weapon, her amber eyes wide and sharp. For 3 heartbeats, they simply stared at each other, and Marcus found himself noticing absurd details. The dusting of some green herb across her knuckles, the way the light caught the slight points of her ears, the fact that she was barefoot and her feet were surprisingly small for someone of her stature. "Who are you?" they both said simultaneously and then stopped, equally surprised. Marcus recovered first, drawing himself up despite the bone-deep weariness that made his joints ache. "I am Marcus Ironwood. This is my house, or it was before." He gestured vaguely at the explosion of greenery that had consumed his home. The orc woman lowered the pestle slowly, though her posture remained wary. "This house has been abandoned for 3 years. I checked with the village clerk. There were no owners listed, no taxes paid. It was legally open for claim under frontier settlement law." Her voice was not what he expected: educated, precise, with only the faintest rasp that might have been an orcish accent, or might simply have been the natural depth of her tone. Marcus felt his anger, which had been building like a good fire, sputter uncertainly. Abandoned. He stepped further into the kitchen, noting how even here, pots of herbs lined the windowsill, how the shelves held jars of dried plants instead of the dusty emptiness he had left behind. "I have been at war, fighting for the crown. They do not give leave for soldiers to return and check on their properties." Something shifted in her expression, a guardedness settling over features that were striking in their own right, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that held intelligence and calculation. The war ended 14 months ago. Every soldier mustered out. Where have you been since then? Marcus felt heat rise to his face. Prisoner. The Caldorians took our regiment in the last push before the treaty. They held us until the ransom could be arranged. I only reached the border last week. The orc woman studied him with those unsettling amber eyes, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed and catalogued like one of her plant specimens. Finally, she set down the pestle and mortar with deliberate care. My name is Grenna Oakroot. I am a healer and herbalist. When I found this house, it was falling apart, roof leaking, windows broken, animals nesting in the walls. I have spent the last 3 years repairing it, cultivating medicinal gardens, building a practice that serves 3 villages. I have every legal right to be here. And I, Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice level, have every moral and legal right as the original owner. I did not abandon this place by choice. Grenna crossed her arms, and Marcus noticed the strength in them, the kind that came from hard physical labor rather than the gym yards where soldiers trained. The law is clear. 3 years of abandonment without taxes paid renders a property available for homesteading. I filed the proper claims. I paid the back taxes you owed 3 years' worth. I have receipts. The mention of receipts, of bureaucratic paperwork, was somehow more stunning than anything else. Marcus found himself at a loss. He had imagined this homecoming in 1,000 different ways during the long years away. He had pictured tearful reunions with neighbors, the quiet satisfaction of returning to his own bed, the simple pleasure of tending his own small plot of land. Never had he imagined arguing property law with an orc woman who had apparently turned his cottage into an apothecary. I have my original deed, he said, though even as he spoke, doubt crept in. The deed had been in a lockbox, hidden under the floorboards in his bedroom. If I can prove ownership, then we have a problem, Grenna finished flatly, because I will not simply walk away from 3 years of work. Everything you see here I built. Every plant, every repair, every client relationship. This is my home now. The emphasis on the last word struck something deep in Marcus's chest. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the same fierce protectiveness he felt mirrored in her stance. This was not a squatter or a thief. This was someone who had found something broken and made it whole, who had claimed it with sweat and skill and stubbornness. I have nowhere else to go, he said, and hated how the exhaustion crept into his voice. I fought for 5 years. I spent over a year in a foreign prison. I walked 2 weeks to get home because I had no coin for a horse. This cottage is all I have in the world. Something in Grenna's expression shifted, a tiny crack in the armor, her arms lowered slightly. The war was hard on everyone. Did orcs fight in it? The question came out sharper than he intended, and immediately he saw her face close off again, the warmth vanishing behind a wall of cold dignity. Some did. Most of us were too busy trying to survive in a world where humans see us as monsters to be conscripted into your battles. Marcus winced. He had known orc soldiers, had fought beside 2 in his company. They had been good men, brave and loyal, and both had died in the mud outside Ravencrest. But he had also seen what happened to orcs in human towns, the suspicion and hatred that followed them, the laws that restricted where they could live and what trades they could practice. I apologize, he said. That was unfair. Grenna blinked, clearly surprised. For a moment, the hard lines of her face softened. You are exhausted, and you have come home to find your house full of plants and an orc. I suppose some hostility is understandable. The dry humor in her voice caught him off guard, and Marcus felt an unexpected smile tug at his lips. It is not what I expected. I imagine not. Grenna turned back to her mortar, but her movements were less defensive now. Are you hungry? I was about to make tea, and there is bread from this morning. The offer was so domestic, so utterly at odds with the situation, that Marcus almost laughed. His stomach, however, answered for him with an audible growl. He had not eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast at a roadside inn. I would appreciate that, he admitted. Grenna nodded and moved to the hearth, his hearth, though it too had been transformed, fitted with clever hooks and chains for hanging pots at different heights. She worked with quiet efficiency, setting a kettle to boil, slicing bread that smelled of honey and grain, producing a small crock of butter that she must have traded for or made herself. Marcus lowered himself onto one of the chairs at the table, grunting as his knees protested. Everything ached. At 32, he felt ancient. You should see a healer, Grenna said without turning around. You move like someone with joint inflammation, common in soldiers who spent years sleeping on cold ground. You are a healer. I am. She glanced over her shoulder, and there was something almost challenging in her look. But I doubt you want an orc treating you. I just said I fought beside orcs, good men. Why would I object? Because most humans do. She turned back to the kettle, but her shoulders were tense. I have lived in this region for 3 years. I have clients, yes, but they come to me only when the human healers cannot help them, or when they are desperate enough to overlook what I am. I am skilled, perhaps the best herbalist within 50 miles, and still I am tolerated rather than welcomed. The bitterness in her voice was earned, Marcus suspected. He had seen how orcs were treated in the army, the extra scrutiny, the casual cruelty. It had made him uncomfortable then, though he had been too young and too focused on survival to speak against it. I do not care what you are, he said quietly. If you can help this damned ache in my knees, I will be grateful. Grenna was silent for a long moment. Then she poured boiling water over something in a clay pot, releasing a sharp, minty scent into the air. I can make you a salve. It will take a few days to prepare properly, but it should help. Thank you. She brought the bread and butter to the table, then returned with 2 cups of tea that steamed gently in the afternoon light. Marcus wrapped his hands around the cup, savoring the warmth. The first sip revealed a complex flavor: mint, yes, but also chamomile and something else, faintly sweet. This is good, he said. It is my own blend, for pain and inflammation. Grenna sat across from him, her own cup cradled in hands that were strong but graceful. You will need to drink it 3 times a day for a week to feel the full effect. They sat in awkward silence, 2 strangers sharing tea in a house they both claimed. Outside, Marcus could hear birdsong, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful in a way he had almost forgotten existed. We need to resolve this, Grenna said finally. The house. Yes, Marcus took another sip of tea, buying time to think. You said you have receipts, proof of your claim, in my room upstairs, and you have your original deed, if it is still where I left it. Under the floorboards in the main bedroom. Grenna's expression turned complicated. That is my room now. I moved in there because it has the best light in the mornings. But I have not disturbed the floorboards. If your deed is there, it will still be there. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we should look, and then we should take everything to the village clerk, let them sort out the legality. Agreed. But Grenna did not look happy about it. Though I warn you, if this becomes a legal battle, I will fight for what is mine. I cannot afford to simply start over. Neither can I. They looked at each other across the table, 2 people trapped in an impossible situation, and Marcus felt the unfairness of it settle like a stone in his chest. Neither of them was wrong. Both of them had legitimate claims, and only one of them could keep the house. Eat, Grenna said, pushing the bread toward him. You look half-starved. Whatever happens, you should not have to deal with it on an empty stomach. Marcus took a slice of bread, buttered it carefully, and bit into it. The taste exploded across his tongue. Honey, yes, but also a nutty richness that spoke of quality grain and skill in the baking. He closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the simple pleasure of good food after so much deprivation. When he opened them again, Grenna was watching him with an expression that might have been sympathy. "How bad was it?" she asked quietly. "The prison." Marcus swallowed his mouthful of bread. "Bad enough. They fed us but barely, and the cold." He trailed off, not wanting to remember the stone cells, the thin blankets, the way his breath had fogged in the air even in summer. "Drink your tea," Grenna said, and there was something gentle in her voice now. "It will help." He drank and ate, and for a little while they simply existed in that sunlit kitchen, the awkwardness easing into something that was not quite companionship, but was no longer hostility. When he finished, Grenna rose and collected the dishes, rinsing them in a bucket of water she had apparently hauled from the well that morning. "I should check the deed," Marcus said, standing. His knees protested but held. "I will come with you." Grenna dried her hands on a cloth. "It is my room, after all." The cottage was small, just 2 rooms and a loft space that Marcus had once used for storage. The bedroom door opened easily, and Marcus stepped into a space that was both familiar and utterly foreign. The bed was the same frame he had built himself years ago, but it was neatly made now with quilts he did not recognize. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars and bottles of all sizes, each labeled in a neat hand. Bundles of drying herbs hung from the ceiling, and the room smelled of lavender and something medicinal. "It is very—" Marcus searched for words. "Organized. I am an herbalist. Organization is essential." But there was a hint of amusement in Grenna's tone. "Which floorboard?" Marcus crossed to the corner nearest the window and knelt, wincing as his knees popped. He counted 3 boards from the wall, then pried at the edge of one with his belt knife. It came up easily, revealing a shallow space beneath. The lockbox was there, dusty but intact. He pulled it out with hands that trembled slightly and worked the simple lock with a key he had carried through 5 years of war, through prison, through everything. The lid opened with a squeak, and there it was, the deed to his cottage, written in the careful script of the village clerk who had overseen the sale when Marcus bought the place 8 years ago. "I have it," he said, and his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Grenna said nothing. She simply watched as he unfolded the paper, checked that it was legitimate, then folded it again with careful precision. "Tomorrow," Marcus said, standing with the deed clutched in his hand. "We will go to the village tomorrow and sort this out." "Tomorrow," Grenna agreed. The question of where Marcus would sleep that night hung unspoken in the air. He could see Grenna working through the same calculation he was. The bed was large enough to share, but that would be wildly inappropriate. The loft was full of her drying herbs and stored supplies, and the front room was so full of plants that there was barely floor space to lie down. "I can sleep outside," Marcus offered. "I have done it often enough." "Do not be ridiculous. You are injured and exhausted." Grenna frowned, clearly thinking. "I can clear space in the loft. It will not be comfortable, but it will be better than the ground." "I do not want to displace you from your own bed. It is not my bed if you have a legal deed to this house." The words came out sharp, almost bitter. Grenna turned away, her shoulders tight. "I will get blankets." She left the room before Marcus could respond, and he stood there holding his deed, feeling like the villain in a story where there should not be any villains at all. This woman had taken something abandoned and made it beautiful. She had worked for 3 years to build a life here. And now he was going to take it away from her through nothing more than an accident of prior ownership. It felt wrong. But what choice did he have? He had nowhere else to go, no other prospects. His family was long dead, his friends scattered or killed in the war. This cottage was his only anchor in a world that had moved on without him. Grenna returned with an armful of blankets and a pillow. "Come, I will show you where you can sleep." The loft was accessed by a sturdy ladder at the back of the main room. Marcus climbed carefully, his knees burning, and emerged into a low space that indeed was full of hanging herbs and stacked crates. But Grenna had cleared a spot near the small window, laying out the blankets to form a makeshift bed. "It is not much," she said from below, her voice floating up. "But it should be warm enough. It is fine, thank you." Marcus lowered himself onto the blankets, and despite the hard floor beneath, the softness of the pillow was a luxury he had not experienced in over a year. "Grenna, yes, I am sorry about all of this." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, "So am I." He heard her move away, heard the sounds of her preparing for her own sleep. Marcus lay back, staring at the dark shapes of hanging herbs above him, and tried to imagine what would happen tomorrow. The village clerk would review their claims. Perhaps there would be a magistrate involved, or the local lord steward. It could take days or weeks to resolve. And in the meantime, they would have to live here together, two strangers sharing a space neither could afford to lose. Marcus closed his eyes and willed sleep to come, though he suspected it would be a long time arriving. Morning came too early, announced by birdsong and the pale light of dawn filtering through the loft window. Marcus woke with every muscle complaining, his body stiff from the hard floor despite the blankets. For a disoriented moment, he could not remember where he was, and then it all came flooding back. The cottage, the garden, Grenna. He descended the ladder carefully, trying to be quiet, but the old wood creaked under his weight. Below, he found the kitchen already occupied. Grenna stood at the hearth, tending a pot that released the warm scent of porridge. She was dressed similarly to yesterday, practical clothing that allowed ease of movement, her hair in that same efficient braid. "Good morning," she said without turning around. "There is water for washing by the door. I drew it fresh this morning." "Thank you." Marcus found the bucket she indicated, along with a clean cloth and a sliver of soap. He washed quickly, the cold water shocking him fully awake, then ran wet hands through his hair in a futile attempt to make himself presentable. When he returned to the kitchen, Grenna had set out 2 bowls of porridge, each drizzled with honey. She sat at the table, eating with focused efficiency, and Marcus took the seat across from her. "You did not have to feed me," he said. "You are a guest in my home. Of course I feed you." She paused, then added with dry humor, "Or perhaps you are the owner and I am the guest. Either way, someone should eat breakfast." Despite everything, Marcus smiled. He took a spoonful of the porridge and found it perfectly cooked, creamy and sweet. "Did you make the honey? I keep bees." 3 hives at the edge of the property. They pollinate the garden and provide honey and wax. Grenna glanced at him. "I have built a complete practice here. It is not just the house. It is everything around it." The implication was clear. She had not just occupied his cottage, she had created an entire livelihood around it. Displacing her would not be simple or easy or clean. "I understand," Marcus said quietly, "but I hope you also understand my position." "I do." Grenna set down her spoon. "That does not make this situation any easier." They finished breakfast in tense silence. Afterward, Grenna carefully packed her receipts and documentation into a leather satchel, while Marcus tucked his deed into an inner pocket of his jacket. The walk to the village was only 20 minutes, following a well-worn path through fields that showed signs of recent planting. The village of Thornhaven had not changed much in 5 years, Marcus noted. The same timber and stone buildings clustered around a central square, the same ancient oak tree providing shade for the market days. But the people looked at him like a stranger, and when they noticed Grenna beside him, their expressions ranged from suspicious to outright hostile. Marcus saw an old woman actually make a warning sign, and a young mother pulled her child closer as they passed. Grenna walked with her head high, her face carefully blank, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "Does this happen often?" he asked quietly. "Every time I come to the village." Her voice was flat, giving nothing away. "I told you, I am tolerated, not welcomed." The clerk's office was a small building near the square. Marcus pushed open the door, and the man behind the desk looked up with the expression of someone whose morning had just been interrupted. He was middle-aged, balding, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose. "Yes," he said, and then his eyes widened slightly. "Marcus Ironwood." "Is that you?" "It is." Marcus was surprised to be recognized. "You remember me, of course. You bought the old Miller cottage 8 years ago, we all thought." The clerk trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "We heard you died in the war." "I did not. But I was away for 5 years and then held prisoner. I only returned yesterday." The clerk's gaze slid to Grenna, and his expression cooled. "I see. And you are here because of the property dispute." "How did you—" Marcus started, but Grenna stepped forward. "Because it was inevitable," she said calmly. "You knew when I filed the homestead claim that the original owner might return. You told me the risk." "I did." The clerk looked between them, his expression troubled. "But I also told you that 3 years was the legal threshold. After 3 years of abandonment without taxes paid, the property becomes available for claim. You followed the law, Grenna. I oversaw the filing myself. And my original deed," Marcus pulled out the paper, "does that count for nothing?" The clerk accepted the deed, examined it carefully, and sighed. "It counts for everything, potentially, but the law is complex. You have a right to petition for restoration of your property, but Grenna has a right to compensation for improvements she has made and for the taxes she paid on your behalf. This will need to go before a magistrate." "How long will that take?" Grenna asked. "Weeks, possibly months." Magistrate Aldwin makes his circuit through the region, but he is only here once a month. His next scheduled visit is— The clerk checked a ledger. 3 weeks from today. Marcus felt his heart sink. 3 weeks of uncertainty, of living in limbo, and what if the magistrate ruled against him? What if the law favored Grenna's claim? "In the meantime," the clerk continued, "I suggest you work out a temporary living arrangement. The property remains in legal dispute, which means neither of you has grounds to evict the other until the magistrate makes a ruling." Grenna and Marcus looked at each other. 3 weeks of sharing the cottage, of navigating around each other, of trying to live in a space they both claimed. "Wonderful," Marcus muttered. "I will prepare the necessary documentation for the magistrate," the clerk said. "You will both need to be present at the hearing to state your cases. I will send word when we have a specific date and time." There was nothing more to say. They left the office and stood in the village square, 2 people bound together by circumstance and conflicting claims. "I suppose we should discuss how this will work," Grenna said finally. "The living arrangements." "I suppose we should." Marcus looked around, aware of the curious and hostile stares they were attracting, but perhaps not here. They walked back to the cottage in silence. The morning had warmed into a pleasant spring day, and the fields around them were alive with growing things. Marcus noticed how Grenna's gaze swept constantly across the landscape, noting plants and growth with the eye of someone who saw possibility everywhere. "Tell me about your work," he said, more to break the silence than anything. Grenna glanced at him, surprised. "My work? You said you are a healer, an herbalist. What exactly does that entail?" For a moment he thought she would not answer, but then she began to speak, her voice losing some of its guarded edge. I treat injuries and illnesses that are within the scope of herbal medicine. Broken bones I can set and splint. Infections I treat with poultices and tinctures. Pain management, inflammation, digestive troubles, skin conditions, all of these respond well to the right plants prepared the right way. I also make salves and soaps, teas and tonics that people buy for general health. And you learned all this where? From my mother initially. She was a healer in our clan. But I also spent years studying with a human herbalist in the Southern Territories. He was old, nearly blind, and he needed an apprentice. He did not care that I was an orc. He cared that I had steady hands and a good memory. There was affection in her voice when she spoke of her teacher, and Marcus found himself curious. What happened to him? He died. 5 years ago. He left me his books and his tools, but his family contested the will. They said an orc could not inherit from a human, that I must have coerced him or worse. So I took what I could carry and I left. I wandered for 2 years, working where I could until I found your cottage. And you have been here ever since. Yes. I have been here, building something real, something lasting. I have clients who depend on me now. A woman in the next village whose arthritis I manage. A farmer whose child I treated for a fever that would have killed him. A blacksmith whose burns I healed. I matter here, even if they hate me for what I am. The fierce pride in her voice struck something in Marcus's chest. He understood that need, that desperate desire to matter, to have a place in the world. I am not trying to destroy what you have built, he said quietly. I just need somewhere to be. I know. Grenna's voice softened. And that is what makes this so difficult. They reached the cottage, and Grenna went immediately to her work, preparing salves and tinctures with focused intensity. Marcus watched for a while, fascinated despite himself by the precision of her movements, the way she measured and mixed with the confidence of deep expertise. "Can I help?" he asked. She looked up, clearly surprised. "You want to help? I need something to do." "And you are making the salve for my knees, are you not? I might as well learn how it is done." Grenna studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Wash your hands thoroughly. Everything must be clean or the salves will spoil." Marcus obeyed, scrubbing his hands with the strong soap Grenna indicated. When he returned to the table, she had laid out an array of materials. Beeswax, rendered fat, dried herbs he could not identify, and several small jars of oil. "We start with the oil infusion," Grenna explained. "These herbs, wintergreen, arnica, and comfrey, have properties that reduce inflammation and pain. But first, they must be infused into a carrier oil to extract the beneficial compounds. I did this step weeks ago, so the oils are ready. Now we combine them with the wax and fat to create a solid salve." She worked as she spoke, melting the wax and fat in a small pot over low heat, then carefully adding the infused oils. The mixture released a sharp, medicinal scent that made Marcus's eyes water slightly. "Now we pour," Grenna said, and demonstrated by carefully filling a small tin with the liquid salve. "It will solidify as it cools. By tonight, it will be ready to use." Marcus watched her fill 3 more tins with the same meticulous care. "You make this seem easy." "It is easy if you understand the principles. But it takes time to learn which herbs do what, how to combine them safely, what proportions to use. I have been studying herbal medicine for 15 years. I am still learning new things." 15 years. Marcus did some quick calculation. "How old are you?" 31. "I began my apprenticeship with my mother when I was 16. Grenna glanced at him. "And you?" 32. "I feel older. War does that." She set aside the pot to cool and began cleaning her tools with the same careful attention she gave everything else. You fought for 5 years. That is a long time. It was. Marcus did not want to talk about the war, about the things he had seen and done. Tell me more about the garden. What else do you grow besides medicinal herbs? Grenna's expression lightened, and for the next hour she walked him through the cottage, pointing out different plants and explaining their uses. There was passion in her voice, a genuine love for the work that was impossible to miss. She showed him the rosemary that helped with memory and circulation, the calendula that healed skin troubles, the chamomile that soothed anxious minds. In the garden outside, she grew dozens more species, each carefully tended and placed according to its needs for sun and water and space. This is remarkable, Marcus said honestly. I had a small vegetable plot when I lived here, but nothing like this. It has taken 3 years to reach this point, Grenna said, and it will take more years still to perfect. There are plants I want to cultivate that need specialized conditions. I have plans to build a greenhouse, to extend the growing season and allow me to grow more delicate species. The enthusiasm in her voice made it clear how much this place meant to her. Marcus felt the guilt settle heavier in his chest. If the magistrate ruled in his favor, all of this, the garden, the practice, the carefully built life, would be destroyed. But what other choice did he have? The days that followed developed an awkward rhythm. Grenna worked in the mornings, seeing clients who came to the cottage with various ailments. Marcus made himself scarce during these visits, not wanting to complicate things with his presence. He spent the time exploring the property, reacquainting himself with land he had once known well. The cottage sat on 5 acres, most of it wooded. But Grenna had cleared and cultivated nearly an acre, creating ordered beds for her herbs and medicinal plants. She had also repaired the small barn that had been half collapsed when Marcus left, turning it into a drying shed and storage space. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of her hard work and skill. In the afternoons, he helped her with whatever she would allow, hauling water from the well, carrying heavy pots, splitting wood for the hearth. Grenna accepted his help with initial reluctance that gradually eased into something like acceptance. They did not talk much during these shared tasks, but the silence became less oppressive, more companionable. Evenings were the hardest. They ate dinner together because it was impractical to do otherwise, sitting at the kitchen table and making stilted conversation about neutral topics. The weather, the growth of the garden, the quality of the bread Grenna had baked that morning. They avoided discussing the upcoming hearing, the magistrate, what would happen when a decision was made. At night, Marcus climbed to the loft and lay awake, listening to the sounds of Grenna moving around below, preparing for bed. He tried not to think about the fact that she slept just below him, tried not to notice the way her laugh sounded when something genuinely amused her, tried not to dwell on how her face softened when she spoke about her work. A week passed, then another. Marcus's knees began to feel better thanks to Grenna's salve and tea, the constant ache fading to something manageable. He put on weight from regular meals, and the gauntness left his face. The nightmares that had plagued him since the war came less frequently, though when they did come, they left him gasping and disoriented in the darkness of the loft. One such night, he woke from a particularly vivid dream fire, screaming, the weight of a dead friend in his arms, and stumbled down the ladder, needing air, needing space, needing anything but the close darkness of the loft. He pushed out the front door into the cool night air and stood there, breathing hard, willing his heart to slow. Marcus! He turned to find Grenna standing in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the moonlight, she looked otherworldly, her green skin taking on a silvery cast. "I am sorry," he managed. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not. I was preparing a tincture that needs to be strained at specific intervals. She studied him with those sharp eyes. Nightmare. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Come. Grenna turned and went back inside. After a moment, Marcus followed. She had him sit at the kitchen table while she prepared something at the hearth. When she returned, she handed him a cup of warm liquid that smelled of valerian and something sweetly floral. Drink. It will help you sleep without dreams. Marcus sipped obediently. The tea was bitter beneath the sweetness, but not unpleasant. Thank you. Grenna sat across from him, her own cup cradled in her hands. How often do you have them, the nightmares? Often enough. He took another sip. They are getting better, I think, less frequent. That is good. The mind needs time to heal just like the body. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I have nightmares too, about the day my clan cast me out. Marcus looked up, surprised. They cast you out? For wanting to study healing with a human, for caring more about medicine than tradition, for being too friendly with humans in general. Grenna's smile was bitter. Orcs are not supposed to be healers, according to my clan. We are supposed to be warriors, or at least to stay within our own communities. Reaching out to humans, wanting to help them, that was betrayal. That is absurd. Is it? Humans have been killing orcs for centuries, taking our lands, driving us into the marginal places. My clan saw my desire to help humans as siding with our oppressors. She met his eyes. They were not entirely wrong. Marcus did not know what to say to that. He had seen the prejudice against orcs, but he had never considered the perspective from the other side, the history of violence and displacement that would make his people seem like enemies. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I am glad you became a healer. You are good at it. You have helped me more than you know. Something shifted in Grenna's expression, a softening that made her look younger, more vulnerable. That is kind of you to say. They sat in silence, drinking their tea, and Marcus felt something ease in his chest. The nightmare receded, leaving only a faint echo of fear. When he finished his cup, Grenna took it from him and set it aside. You should try to sleep now. The tea will help. Marcus nodded and stood, but paused at the base of the ladder. Grenna, thank you for everything. You are welcome. He climbed to the loft and lay down, and this time when sleep came, it was deep and dreamless. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus was helping Grenna weed the garden when they heard the sound of a horse approaching. A young man in the livery of the magistrate's office dismounted and approached with a sealed letter. For Marcus Ironwood and Grenna Oakroot, he announced. Official notice from Magistrate Aldwin. Grenna accepted the letter, broke the seal, and read quickly. Her face went carefully blank. Well? Marcus asked. The hearing is set for 3 days from now. We are both required to appear and present our cases. She handed him the letter, and Marcus skimmed it quickly. The language was formal and bureaucratic, outlining the proceedings and reminding them to bring all relevant documentation. 3 days. That was all the time they had left in this strange limbo. After the messenger left, they returned to their weeding in silence. But the ease that had been building between them over the past 2 weeks felt strained now, threatened by the looming hearing and everything it represented. That evening, Marcus made a decision. Grenna, he said over dinner, I want to talk about the hearing. She looked up, her expression guarded. What about it? I have been thinking. About everything you have built here, about your practice and your clients and the work you have done. He took a breath. If the magistrate rules in my favor, I do not want to simply take everything from you. That would not be right. What are you proposing? I do not know yet. Maybe there is some kind of compromise. Shared ownership or compensation, or, he broke off, frustrated by his own uncertainty. I just know that you deserve better than to lose everything because of a legal technicality. Grenna was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft. That is generous of you. More generous than I expected. You have been generous to me. You fed me when you did not have to, treated my injuries, let me stay here even though you could have refused. Marcus met her eyes. We may be in conflict over this house, but that does not mean we have to be enemies. No, Grenna agreed. We do not. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than the property dispute. Marcus found himself noticing things he had been trying not to notice. The way the lamplight caught the curve of Grenna's cheek, the strength in her hands, the intelligence in her eyes. She was striking, he realized, in a way that had nothing to do with human standards of beauty and everything to do with the force of her presence. From the look on her face, Grenna was having similar thoughts. She stood abruptly, gathering the dishes with sharp, efficient movements. I should clean up, and I have work to do tonight. Of course. Marcus stood as well, knowing he had unsettled her, understanding that some things were too complicated to acknowledge directly. He retreated to the loft and lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Grenna moving below, and admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for days. He was attracted to her. Not despite her orcish features, but because of the whole person. She was strong, skilled, determined, kind in unexpected ways. It was a terrible time to have such a realization, with the hearing looming and their futures uncertain. But the heart, Marcus had learned in the war, did not care about timing or convenience. It simply felt what it felt. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Grenna organized her receipts and documentation obsessively, rehearsing what she would say to the magistrate. Marcus reviewed his own papers, making notes about his military service and the circumstances that had kept him away. They were polite to each other, careful, dancing around the tension that had sprung up between them. On the morning of the hearing, they dressed in their best clothes. Marcus wore his old dress uniform, carefully brushed and mended. Grenna wore a tunic of deep green embroidered with subtle patterns, her hair braided and wound around her head like a crown. She looked regal, Marcus thought, like someone who should be holding court rather than defending her right to exist in a human village. They walked to Thornhaven together, saying little. The village square had been set up for the hearing, with chairs arranged in rows and a table at the front for the magistrate. Villagers had already gathered, drawn by curiosity or genuine interest in the outcome. Marcus saw hostile looks directed at Grenna, heard whispers that were probably not meant to be kind. Magistrate Aldwin was an older man with iron-gray hair and a stern expression that suggested he had heard every excuse and seen every trick. He settled himself at the table, reviewed a stack of papers, and then called for order. "We are here to resolve a property dispute," he announced in a voice that carried easily across the square. "Marcus Ironwood claims ownership of the cottage on Meadow Road based on an original deed of purchase. Grenna Oakroot claims ownership based on 3 years of homesteading and the payment of back taxes. Both claims have legal merit. Our task today is to determine which takes precedence." He gestured for Marcus to approach. "Mr. Ironwood, present your case." Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. He explained his purchase of the cottage 8 years prior, his conscription into the army, the 5 years of war and the subsequent imprisonment. He showed the magistrate his deed, along with papers from the army confirming his service and release. "I did not abandon this property by choice," Marcus said. "I was serving the crown and then I was held prisoner. I came home as soon as I was able. Under the law, I believe my original ownership should be honored." Magistrate Aldwin nodded thoughtfully and made notes. Then he gestured for Grenna. She stepped forward with her head high, and Marcus felt a surge of pride in her courage. She explained her discovery of the abandoned cottage, her filing of the homestead claim, the 3 years of work she had invested. She presented her receipts for the back taxes, along with statements from clients attesting to her skill as a healer. "I have built a practice here that serves 3 villages," Grenna said, her voice steady despite the hostile audience. "I have repaired a building that was falling apart. I have created something of value from nothing. According to frontier homestead law, that gives me a legitimate claim to this property." The magistrate reviewed her documents, then looked up. "Miss Oakroot, are you aware that homestead law includes provisions for situations where the original owner was prevented from returning due to military service?" Grenna's face went carefully blank. "I am now." "Then you understand that such provisions may supersede your claim, regardless of the work you have done." "I understand that human law favors humans over orcs, yes." The statement hung in the air, blunt and challenging. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, some in offense. Magistrate Aldwin's expression did not change. "The law favors documentation and precedent, Miss Oakroot, not race." He paused, then added more gently, "Though I will not pretend that bias does not exist in how laws are applied." He spent several minutes reviewing all the documents, comparing dates, checking references. The crowd waited in tense silence. Marcus found himself holding his breath, aware that everything was about to change. Finally, Magistrate Aldwin looked up. "This is a complex case. Both parties have legitimate claims. However, the law is clear. Military service constitutes an acceptable reason for absence from property, and original deeds hold weight even after periods of abandonment. Therefore, I must rule in favor of Marcus Ironwood as the legal owner of the property in question." The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus saw Grenna's face go utterly still, all expression draining away. Around them, the crowd reacted with a mix of satisfaction and sympathy, depending on their prejudices. But the magistrate was not finished. "However, I am also ruling that Miss Oakroot is entitled to substantial compensation for improvements made to the property and for taxes paid. Mr. Ironwood, you will need to reimburse Miss Oakroot for all documented expenses, plus an additional amount for the value of the garden and repairs. I am setting this amount at—" He consulted his notes. 300 gold marks. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 300 gold marks was a fortune. He did not have even 10 marks to his name. "But sir," he protested, "I do not have that kind of money. I was a soldier and then a prisoner. I have nothing." "Then you will need to arrange a payment plan, or you will need to sell the property to pay the debt." The magistrate's tone was implacable. "Miss Oakroot is entitled to compensation for her work. That is the law." He banged his gavel and the hearing was over. Marcus and Grenna stood in the emptying square, both of them in a state of shock. Around them, villagers dispersed, already gossiping about the outcome. Someone jostled Grenna roughly as they passed, muttering something Marcus did not catch. He stepped closer to her instinctively, a protective gesture that earned him a sharp look. "I do not need defending," she said. "I know. But they should not treat you that way. They always do." Grenna's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Congratulations, Marcus. You won your house. Now you just have to find 300 gold marks somewhere." She walked away before he could respond, her spine straight, her head high. Marcus watched her go and felt something crack in his chest. This was not victory. This was disaster for both of them. He caught up with her on the path outside the village. "Grenna, wait." "Why, what else is there to say? We need to figure this out. Together." He grabbed her arm gently and she stopped, though she did not look at him. "I do not have 300 marks. You know I do not. And I cannot sell the cottage because where would I go? We are both trapped." "Yes." Finally, Grenna turned to face him, and the pain in her eyes was stunning in its intensity. "We are both trapped. You in a house you cannot afford to keep, me with a debt I will probably never see repaid. The magistrate was very clever in his ruling, was he not? No one wins, everyone suffers." "That is not what I want." "Then what do you want, Marcus?" The words came out sharp, almost desperate. "Tell me what you want, because I do not know what to do anymore. I cannot afford to start over. I do not have the money or the energy or the heart. But I also cannot stay here, living on your charity, waiting for a debt repayment that will never come." Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw someone as lost as he was, someone fighting to hold on to dignity in a situation designed to strip it away. And in that moment, clarity struck. "Stay," he said. Grenna blinked. "What? Stay, keep the cottage, keep the garden, keep your practice. I will," he searched for the words. "I will sign it over to you, all of it. You need it more than I do. Do not be ridiculous. You have nowhere else to go, you just said so. I will figure something out. Join another regiment, find work somewhere. It does not matter." And as he spoke, Marcus realized it was true. The cottage had been important when it was all he had left of his old life, but it was just a building. Grenna had made it into something more, a place of healing, a refuge, a home. "You belong here in a way I never did. This should be yours." Grenna stared at him, her amber eyes wide with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because it is the right thing to do." Marcus managed a smile. "And because I think if our situations were reversed, you might do the same for me." For a long moment she did not speak. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "I cannot let you do that." "Why not?" "Because—" She trailed off, struggling with something. "Because it is not fair to you. And because I do not want you to go." The last words came out barely above a whisper, but Marcus heard them clearly. His heart did something complicated in his chest. "Grenna, I know this is foolish," she interrupted, her words coming faster now, as if she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. "We have known each other less than a month. We have been fighting over property rights. This makes no sense. But somewhere in the past few weeks, I have," she broke off, closing her eyes briefly. "I have come to care for you, to value your presence, to dread the thought of you leaving. So no, I cannot simply let you sign over the cottage and walk away. That is not what I want." Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "What do you want?" Grenna opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "I want you to stay, not as my debtor, not as the former owner, but as—" She faltered, then straightened her shoulders and pushed forward. "As my partner. In the cottage, in the work, in everything, if you will have me." The words hung between them, vulnerable and brave. Marcus could barely breathe. "You are asking me to build a life together." "Yes." Grenna's hands were trembling, he noticed, though her voice stayed steady. "I know what people will say. A human and an orc, it is forbidden in most places, unthinkable in others. Your neighbors will shun you. Your family, if you have any—" "I have no family," Marcus interrupted. "No one who would care, and the neighbors have never been particularly warm to me anyway." "Then," hope crept into her voice, "you are considering this." "I am doing more than considering it." Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, the way her tusks caught the light. "Grenna, I have spent the past 3 days trying not to think about how much I admire you, how much I respect your strength and skill and courage. I have been trying not to notice how you make me laugh, how safe I feel in your presence, how much I look forward to seeing you every morning. I have been trying not to fall in love with you because it seemed like the worst possible timing." He took a breath. "I failed spectacularly." Grenna made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "That is the most ridiculous declaration I have ever heard. Is it working?" "Yes, you fool." And then she was in his arms, and he was holding her, and her lips found his in a kiss that was clumsy and perfect and tasted of hope. They stood there on the path, two people who should have been enemies, who had every reason to hate each other, and instead chose something entirely different. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. "This is going to be complicated," Grenna warned. "Everything worth having is complicated. People will talk. Let them. The magistrate will probably require new paperwork. We will fill out whatever forms are necessary." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, marveling at how right this felt. "Grenna Oakroot, will you let me stay? Will you let me be part of what you have built here, on one condition?" Her eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. "You have to actually help in the garden. No more standing around looking decorative." "I have never looked decorative in my life." "Debatable." She kissed him again, quick and sweet. "Come on, we have a lot to figure out." They walked back to the cottage hand in hand, talking over each other in their excitement. They would need to return to the magistrate with their new arrangement, work out the details of shared ownership, probably endure more bureaucratic complications. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that they had found something neither of them had been looking for. A home, a partnership, a future that included both of them. Over the following weeks, they worked out the practicalities. Marcus proved to have a good head for business, helping Grenna organize her records and expand her client base. He learned herbalism from her, slowly but steadily, developing a feel for which plants did what. His military experience made him useful in other ways. He could handle difficult clients, negotiate fair prices for supplies, and provide security against the occasional person who thought an orc woman living alone was an easy target. Grenna, in turn, taught him patience and precision. She showed him how to listen to what clients were not saying, how to observe symptoms with a healer's eye. She shared her knowledge freely, answering his endless questions with good humor. The villagers of Thornhaven took longer to accept their arrangement. There were whispers, of course, and disapproving looks. But slowly, as weeks turned to months, even the most prejudiced residents had to acknowledge that Grenna was an exceptional healer, and Marcus was a decent man. The fact that they were clearly, obviously in love helped. There was something undeniable about the way they looked at each other, the way they moved together with unconscious synchronization. Summer arrived, and with it the full glory of Grenna's garden. The cottage was surrounded by blooming herbs, the air constantly perfumed with lavender, chamomile, and a dozen other scents. Bees hummed among the flowers. Birds nested in the eaves. It was a place of life and growth and healing. On a warm evening in late summer, Marcus and Grenna sat on the small porch they had built together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. Marcus had his arm around Grenna's shoulders, and she leaned into him with comfortable familiarity. "I have been thinking," Marcus said. "Dangerous habit," he smiled. "I have been thinking we should make this official, legal." Grenna turned to look at him, her expression curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean marriage, if you would have me." He had been nervous about this conversation, but looking at her now, the nervousness faded. This was right. "I know it will cause complications, legally, socially, but I want to be your husband, Grenna. I want everyone to know that we chose each other." For a moment Grenna did not speak. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You know what you are asking." Marriage between a human and an orc is not recognized in most regions. We would have to find a priest willing to perform the ceremony. Our children, if we have any, would be considered half-breeds, neither fully human nor fully orc. You would be giving up any chance at a normal life. "I do not want a normal life. I want this life, with you." Marcus took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "So yes, I know what I am asking, and I am asking it anyway. Will you marry me?" Grenna's smile was brilliant, transforming her face. "Yes. Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man." I will marry you." They kissed as the sun set, sealing their promise. Marcus felt a peace settle over him that he had not experienced since before the war. This was home. Not the cottage, though he loved it. Not the land, though it was beautiful. Home was this woman in his arms, this life they were building together, this future that held endless possibilities. The wedding took place 2 months later, in early autumn when the garden was heavy with herbs ready for harvest. They found a priest in a neighboring village, an elderly man who believed love was love regardless of species. The ceremony was small, just a handful of clients who had become friends, the village clerk who had come to respect their determination, and a few curious onlookers who stayed out of genuine goodwill rather than prejudice. Grenna wore a dress she had sewn herself, deep green with embroidered wildflowers. Marcus wore his dress uniform, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. They spoke their vows in the garden they had cultivated together, promising to honor and support each other through whatever came. When the priest pronounced them married, the small crowd applauded. Marcus kissed his wife, and felt joy bubble up in his chest, effervescent and real. They celebrated with a feast prepared by clients and friends, simple food made extraordinary by the company and the occasion. There was music, someone producing a fiddle and another a drum, and dancing on the grass as twilight descended. Marcus danced with Grenna, both of them laughing at their own clumsiness, not caring who saw. As night fell and their guests departed, Marcus and Grenna stood alone in the garden. The cottage behind them glowed with warm lamplight. The air smelled of flowers and earth and the promise of rain. "Thank you," Marcus said softly. Grenna looked at him quizzically. "For what?" "For taking over my house. For staying when you could have left. For giving me a reason to come home." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "For everything. You are welcome." Her voice was tender. "Though I think we both know you gave as much as you received. Maybe we saved each other. Maybe we did." They went inside together, into the cottage that was now undeniably theirs, built on compromise and understanding and love. The war was behind them. The legal battles were settled. The future stretched out, uncertain in its details but solid in its foundation. Marcus had returned home expecting nothing and had found everything. He had found purpose in Grenna's work, peace in their shared life, and love in the most unexpected place. The soldier who had walked away 5 years ago, young and uncertain, had returned as a man who finally understood what mattered. And the orc woman who had claimed his house through sheer determination and hard work had found something she had not known she needed, a partner who saw her not as another, but as herself. Someone who valued her strength and intelligence, who stood beside her rather than trying to control her. Together, they had built something more than a home. They had built a life. The following spring, Grenna discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy tinged with apprehension. They both knew their child would face challenges neither of them had dealt with. But Marcus held Grenna's hand and promised that their child would be loved, would be protected, would grow up knowing that their parents had chosen each other against all odds. The baby was born in late autumn, a daughter with her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes. They named her Helena, and she was perfect. The first time Marcus held her, feeling the weight of his daughter in his arms, he wept. This tiny person represented everything good that had come from his decision to return home, everything right about the life he and Grenna had built. Grenna recovered from the birth quickly, her healer's knowledge serving her well. Within weeks, she was back at work, though now with Helena in a sling against her chest. Clients cooed over the baby, and even the most prejudiced residents of Thornhaven had to admit that Helena was adorable. Marcus took to fatherhood with the same determination he brought to everything else. He learned to change diapers, to soothe a crying infant, to function on very little sleep. He sang Helena silly songs from his own childhood and told her stories about her mother's bravery and skill. Grenna watched him with soft eyes, falling in love with him all over again as she saw his gentleness with their daughter. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still people who disapproved of their marriage, who made snide comments or gave them hostile looks. There were legal complications around Helena's status, questions about inheritance and citizenship that required careful navigation. There were hard winters and failed harvests, illness and injury, and all the usual difficulties of life. But through it all, Marcus and Grenna faced everything together. They built a practice that became renowned throughout the region, attracting clients from villages days away. They expanded the garden, adding a greenhouse that allowed year-round cultivation. They took on apprentices, teaching the next generation of healers regardless of species. Helena grew into a bright, curious child who loved working in the garden and learning about herbs. She had her mother's gift for healing and her father's stubborn determination. Marcus and Grenna taught her to be proud of her heritage, both human and orc, to stand tall in the face of prejudice. On quiet evenings, when Helena was asleep and the work was done, Marcus and Grenna would sit together on their porch, watching the stars emerge. Sometimes they talked about the future, making plans and dreaming dreams. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, grateful for the life they had somehow managed to create. Marcus never regretted his decision to stay, to build this life with Grenna. The cottage that had once been his alone became something infinitely more precious as their shared home. The land that he had barely cultivated became a thriving garden of healing under Grenna's expert care. The lonely existence he had left behind transformed into a family full of love and laughter and purpose. And Grenna, who had once been an outcast moving from place to place, finally found not just a home but belonging. She found a partner who saw her clearly, loved her fiercely, and stood beside her through everything. She built a practice that mattered, that made a real difference in people's lives. She raised a daughter who would never doubt her place in the world because her parents had fought so hard to create that place. The soldier had returned home after 5 years to find his house taken over by an orc woman and her garden. What he found instead was his future, his family, and his heart. What seemed like a disaster became the greatest gift of his life. And they lived together in that cottage on the edge of the frontier, healing the sick, growing their herbs, raising their daughter, and proving every day that love could overcome prejudice. That home was not a place but the people you chose, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected encounters. The story could have ended in conflict, in bitterness, in yet another tale of division between species and people. Instead, it ended in joy. In a garden full of healing plants, a cottage full of laughter, and 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Marcus Ironwood and Grenna Oakroot built a life together that honored both their pasts and their futures. They created a legacy not of war or prejudice, but of healing and love and determination. And that legacy lived on in Helena, in their apprentices, in every person whose life was touched by their work. Years later, when Marcus was old and gray, and his bones ached despite all of Grenna's remedies, he would sit on the porch with his wife, her hair now streaked with silver, her hands still steady and skilled, and marvel at the path his life had taken. The young soldier who had marched off to war could never have imagined this future, but the man he had become, shaped by hardship and love and partnership, could not imagine any other life. No regrets, Grenna would ask sometimes, as if she needed reassurance even after all these years. "Not one," Marcus always answered, and meant it with his whole heart. Their garden continued to bloom season after season, a testament to what could be built when two people chose understanding over conflict, partnership over possession, love over fear. The cottage stood strong, its walls holding countless memories, its rooms echoing with decades of laughter and learning. And in the end, that was the true homecoming. Not returning to a place, but finding a person who made anywhere feel like home. Marcus had lost his house and gained a life. Grenna had claimed a cottage and found a family. Together, they proved that the best stories are not about winning or losing, but about finding the unexpected grace in compromise, the surprising joy in the complications, and the profound beauty in choosing to build something together rather than fighting alone. The soldier had come home. And home, it turned out, was so much more than he had ever dreamed possible.